Where's Cross Question, says someone on Twitter. We do Cross Question Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Yes, we did do it on Thursday last week, but that was because it was a bank holiday. And next Thursday, let me tell you, we have a local election night special programme from 10 p.m. until 6 a.m. Friday morning. That'll be presented by myself and my for the many colleague, Jackie Smith. Now, in this hour, we're going to be talking to Bill Browder. He's got a new book out, Freezing Order, a true story of Russian money laundering, murder and surviving Vladimir Putin's wrath, and he joins me in the studio. Bill, very good evening. Last time you came in, the phone lines nearly melted. It was quite something, and then afterwards people watched the hour back on YouTube and Global Player, I think more times than virtually any other hour I've done in the last year. So there's a real appetite for knowledge about what you are talking about. So thanks for that. We're going to have another great hour now. Now, this book, your previous book, Red Notice, that was a bestseller. What are you saying in this book that you didn't cover in your first?
Well, so Red Notice was about my my career in Russia, how I was an investment manager. I uncovered corruption. I exposed it, and in retaliation, I was expelled from the country. My lawyer, Sergei Magnitsky, was arrested, tortured, and murdered in police custody. And then, so the first book was all about my fight for justice leading up to something called the Magnitsky Act, which was a piece of legislation in the United States to freeze the assets and ban the visas of Russian human rights violators and kleptocrats. This book is all about saying to ourselves, who got the money that Sergei Magnitsky had discovered and was killed over? And I've spent the last 10 years looking for that money, finding that money, and discovering that none other than Vladimir Putin was a recipient of that money.
Wow.
And it wasn't just, he didn't just sit back and let himself get discovered. He tried to kidnap me, kill me, arrest me, and go after every other person who had anything to do with me. And it's a truly shocking story of how far Vladimir Putin was ready to go to hide his ill-gotten gains.
Well, let's start at the very beginning on that. How do you even? I wouldn't know where to start to search for that kind of money.
And nor did I. And who would? I mean, money laundering is a complex crime. Who knows how to get anything there? And I'll tell you how we discovered how we got our first thread. We had no idea where the money went. But interestingly, the police officers who were involved in arresting Sergei and who were involved in the scam that Sergei discovered, these guys were living so large you can't even imagine. So these guys were like on $15,000 a year salary, and they were riding around in Porsche Cayenne cars. They were flying first class on vacations. They were on Instagram partying. And they were not even ashamed of it. And so we made these little movies about these guys on YouTube, and they went viral. And we at the bottom of our webpage we said, if you have any more information, please come forward. And someone came forward. It was a Russian guy who was part of the criminal group, who fell out with the criminal group, who was in charge of money laundering for the criminal group. His name was Alexander Parapolichny. He came forward. He met with us in London. He said, here are the bank statements of where the money went at Credit Suisse in Zurich. And
how would he have those?
Because he was the guy organizing the money laundering. Right. So he fell out with the people who he was laundering the money for. He gave them to us. We gave those documents to the Swiss police. The Swiss police froze the money at Credit Suisse, like $11 million. And then he dropped dead. That was the first of a number of deaths in this case. But we carried on with our investigation, and we discovered that after Switzerland, it went to New York, it went to France, it went to Cyprus, it went to Latvia, Lithuania, etc. And we started investigating all over the world, and eventually we discovered that some of the money went to Vladimir Putin. And it was interesting because now Vladimir Putin doesn't hold any money in his own name. The money went to a guy who is a famous cellist His name is Sergei Roldugin, and he was exposed in the Panama Papers as being a cellist who had received $2 billion. And everyone said, why does this cellist have $2 billion? Yo-Yo Ma is the richest cellist in the world. He's only got $15 million. How does this Russian cellist have $2 billion? But
I would ask how a cellist gets $15 million, but...
So this cellist has $2 billion. The Panama Papers showed all these Russian oligarchs and state banks giving this cellist all this money. And it turns out that this cellist is Putin's very best friend from childhood. He is the godfather of Putin's daughter. And he is the person who introduced Putin to his first wife. And he is one of the many people who holds Putin's money for him. And we discovered that this cellist got some of the money from the crime that Sergei Magnitsky was killed over. And so this whole story was this incredible sort of lifting the hood of all this Russian dirty money story. And basically what it showed was that Putin is not the normal head of state. He's not a person who leads his country to serve his people. Vladimir Putin is a guy who is just a common criminal who just steals money every place he can get it. And by discovering that, I think it's probably the most important discovery, because everybody seems to think that Putin is, got some kind of grand vision for, recreating the Soviet Union or the Imperial Russia. No. Vladimir Putin is a thug who has stolen a lot of money. This is just one of 1,000 crimes that he's been involved in. And the reason that he's invaded Ukraine is because he wanted to basically divert the attention and the anger of the Russian people away from him, who had stolen all this money, towards a foreign enemy. And that's what this war is about.
And what does he use all this money for?
Well, it's a great question, because most people, when they see a guy this rich, they say, well, what does he need the money for? He's the most powerful guy in the world, or one of the most powerful people in the world. What does he need all this money for? And the answer is, he doesn't need the money, but you can't be the most powerful person in Russia without being the richest person in Russia. And so he's basically, and in fact, you've got to be the most vicious person, the richest person, the most powerful person, the everythingist person to be at the top of the food chain there. And that's what it's about. It's not really about, of course, he's got a $1.3 billion villa, one of many, and he's got yachts here, there, and everywhere, and private jets and all this kind of stuff. But it's not about that. It's just, he's got to be the richest because he's the most powerful.
Now, the golden rule of publishing is you want to publish a book where the author grabs the reader's attention within the first 3 pages. Your first chapter in this book and what happened to you in Madrid, if people aren't hooked for the rest of the book after reading that, I don't know how you hook someone in. Just tell us, this will encourage people to buy the book just by what happened to you in this chapter.
So the first chapter of the book is called The Madrid Arrest. I was invited to Madrid by the chief anti-corruption prosecutor of Spain. His name is Jose Grinda, and we had found information that the crime that Sergei Magnitsky had discovered and was killed over, the financial crime, some of the money had gone to purchase luxury real estate on the coast of Spain. So we filed a complaint with Prosecutor Grinda, and he got our complaint. He thought it was worth investigating, and he invited me to come and give formal evidence to him in a formal setting so that he could begin his investigation. So I fly to Madrid. I stay at this beautiful hotel called the Grand Hotel Inglés in the old part of Madrid. I wake up the next morning to go to my meeting with this prosecutor, and as I open the door to my hotel room, there are 2 very large, uniformed Spanish national police officers standing outside the door with a clipboard. And one of them asks me, through the hotel manager who's standing there with him, please give me your identification. So I hand over my passport. He compares it to a piece of paper he's holding on his clipboard. And he says, you're under arrest. And I said, what for? And he said, Interpol Russia. And I thought, oh my God. So here I am going to meet the chief anti-corruption prosecutor to investigate a bunch of corrupt officials who have stolen money and put it in Spain. And those same corrupt officials have gone through a different branch of the Spanish police to have me arrested. Now, so I'm in my hotel room, and the hotel manager wants to clear the room out so he can use it for another guest, and so he asks them to let me pack my bags. So I scramble in there, and I surreptitiously tweet out, "I'm being arrested in Madrid right now on a Russian warrant." So we go down. The police officers put me in the police car, and they strangely don't confiscate my phones. So I've got two phones with me, and I'm in the back of the police car. And I'm thinking to myself, what if people don't believe my tweet? I've got a lot of Twitter followers. What if they don't believe that maybe someone had hacked my account or it's a joke? And so I surreptitiously take my phone out and I snap a picture of the back of their heads, along with all the paraphernalia, the police radios, and all this kind of stuff in the front. And I tweet out another picture on the way to the police station. At this point, my phone blows up. News alerts everywhere. Bill Browder being arrested in Madrid. All sorts of.
I remember this.
It was crazy. All sorts of journalists are calling Interpol, calling the Spanish police, calling the British government, calling everybody, saying, "What the hell's going on? This guy he shouldn't be arrested."
And what did you think was about to happen at that point?
Well, so this was the scary thing. I was thinking to myself, okay, this is pretty bad, but what if these people are not actually police officers? What if these guys had just gotten some uniforms, stolen a police car, and they were actually working for the Russians? Because Vladimir Putin has been trying to get me for the last 8 years. And I'm thinking, what if this is a kidnapping? And I'm sitting in the back of this police car, and there's you can't open the door handle. There's no door handles. You can't roll down the windows. You're stuck in the back of this police car. So I'm sitting there, and I'm getting more and more agitated. And then we come up to this square, this sort of strange square, and the police car stops, and these guys get out, and we're standing in front of a nondescript building, and they ask me to get out of the car, and they don't speak much English, I don't speak much Spanish, and I say, "What are we here for?" And they say, "Medical exam." And I'm thinking, what? Medical exam? I've never heard of that. And I could just picture that I go into some room, and two guys grab me, and some guy in some cheap suit with a syringe injects me with something, and the next thing I do, I wake up in a Russian jail.
Yeah.
And so I ball up my fist, and I'm ready to have a confrontation, and one of them calls some number, and there's a standoff, and eventually they don't take me into the police station. Into the building. They bundle me back into the police car, and we drive away. And eventually we arrive at the at a real police station. And and believe it or not, I'm relieved that we're in a police station, and I'm not going off to some getting stuck in some container to be shipped off to Russia. And I'm in the police station, and they're all very excited. This is it's not every day that an international fugitive wanted by Interpol is caught and brought into the police station. And there's this air of energy and buzz. And eventually, I'm sitting there for 2 hours, and then they get the call from Interpol, which is release this guy. And you could just feel the energy coming out of there, the energy dissipating as they false alarm, and what a relief. And you can't imagine how angry the prosecutor was who had invited me that he got sidetracked by this whole corrupt ordeal.
Well, that's how the book starts. We'll find out a bit more about what's in the rest of the book in just a moment. It's 16 minutes past 8 on LBC.
LBC. Hi. on LBC.
18 minutes past 8. We're with Bill Browder. His book is called Freezing Order. A lot of the episodes you describe in the book sort of, I think, leave people wondering, well, what is the relevance of all of this to what's going on in Ukraine at the moment? We've got all of these oligarchs being sanctioned. Obviously, I was going to say you know a lot of them, or you certainly know a lot about them, and you've been on their trail for quite a long time. In terms of the reaction from Western governments to what's happened in terms of sanctions, do you think they've broadly got it right so far?
So let me just back up before I get into the exact question. So my book is all about tracing the money from this one crime. What I discovered, and what's in the book, is how it turns out that the money from this one crime is just 1/1000th of the money that Vladimir Putin has stolen that we were able to identify. We were able to identify $232 billion of money that was stolen from Russia through just one bank, Danske Bank. And that one bank then laundered it into all sorts of other places. $232 billion. And so I would guess that if we were able to lift the hood on the other banks in Austria and Sweden and various other places, that the amount of money that Vladimir Putin and his cronies over the last 22 years have stolen is about $1 trillion.
And how much of that is in London?
Quite a bit, because London is one of the end points of that money. And this is the key to the whole thing. So the money is in London, in houses on Belgrave Square and Eaton Square. And that was money that was meant to be spent on medicine and education and healthcare for the Russian people. And this is the crux of the whole issue, which is that these guys in Russia, they just got too carried away with the stealing to such an extent that they just hollowed out the whole country. And in doing so, they've created this huge risk for themselves. None of them, Vladimir Putin and all the people around him, they can never step down from power, because if they did so, their money would get taken away, they get put in jail, and they'd probably die. And so they have to stay in power forever. And how do you stay in power forever if you've stolen everything from the people who, in theory, should vote for you? First of all, you make sure they don't vote. And secondly, you do one thing which is more important than anything, which is you create a huge distraction. And that's what this war is about. It's about that $1 trillion. It's about distracting the people over that $1 trillion. And so this whole thing in Ukraine is not about Putin and his imperial ambitions or anything. This is about just a grubby little man who's stolen a ton of money and wants to make sure he can get away with it.
The amount of money that has come into Western banks, I mean, a lot of it in London, but other places too. Why have Western governments done nothing to stop it? I mean, in some ways, you almost think they've encouraged it. I mean, how much of that money is vital to the operation of some of these banks?
It's crucial. I mean, it's crucial to all sorts of people. And why haven't they stopped it? Because too many people who were close to power were making too much money, and they didn't. And they wanted to make sure it wasn't stopped. And I'll tell you something. We went with our complaints, like I had gone to Jose Grinda in Spain. I took the same information on the money that came to London, and I took it to the National Crime Agency. And they wrote me a letter, a rejection letter, saying, we don't think a domestic investigation is the best way forward. And the person who wrote that letter came to me after he left the National Crime Agency and told me that he thought there should be an investigation. And he was ordered in no uncertain terms by the most senior people in the National Crime Agency not to investigate.
And why would that be?
Well, there's several possibilities. Either political direction, that they were told, let's not rock the boat with Russia. Incompetence, they just didn't know how to investigate. Or corruption. I can't answer which of those three.
But that is a disgrace, isn't it? I mean, when somebody wanted and saw reasonable grounds to investigate, and then they were prevented from doing so, I mean, that is a scandal.
It's a scandal, and it's never been investigated. And this is not the first time I'm talking about it. I talked about this in front of the Home Affairs Select Committee. I've talked about it with many members of Parliament. And we have a law enforcement system here that's not fit for purpose. There has never been an economic crime investigation into Russian money laundering since the beginning of the Putin regime in this country.
Well, if not now, when?
Well, there should be. I don't think there ever will be unless the whole thing is taken out, root and branch, and reestablished in a proper reformed
But
way.
is that because if the ultimate truth ever gets out, it would bring the whole house of cards crumbling down? Is that why? I mean,
No, I mean that could be why. Maybe I'm being too optimistic. I think it's because the system is not set up to do this. I mean, I've worked with the U.S. Department of Justice on a similar investigation in the same, based on the same complaints, and I've seen, when you have proper prosecutors, what they do, and it's awesome. It's really impressive, and I've seen these people, and they just don't want to do it. And I think part of it is that they don't have enough money to investigate. Part of it is that everyone tells them don't investigate, and who knows? Maybe some of them are on the take. I don't know. But what I can say is that unless this system here, the law enforcement system, economic crimes, is fully reformed, this stuff will carry on.
But what is your suspicion? You've just given examples of some reasons why this may not have happened, but which do you think is the main one? Because coming from the world of politics, I would personally find it horrific if it was a political decision to stop a crime investigation. My suspicion you may think I'm naive here, my suspicion is that it wouldn't have been that one. It would have had to have been one of the others.
Well, it wouldn't be much better if it was corruption. But let's just talk about this political decision. Do you remember Alexander Litvinenko, the Russian dissident FSB agent who was murdered with polonium-210? His wife wanted to have a public inquiry into his death. And Theresa May, who was Home Secretary at the time, wrote a letter saying that we shouldn't do this because it would harm political and business relations with Russia. In other words, let's not investigate this death for business reasons, for political reasons. That's pretty shocking. And that happened in open court, her letter. No one ever talks about that, but that is what happened. I can also make very clear, articulate arguments about how the system doesn't work, how there's a total inequality of arms. You have very poor lawyers in the Crown Prosecution Service, and you have the best lawyers that money can buy that the oligarchs employ, and it's a total inequality where, if there's ever a battle, who's going to win? It's all these fancy QCs that cost £1,000 an hour.
And I remember that was an argument the government used as to why they were slightly behind maybe some other countries in imposing sanctions, because they had to get the legals right, and they quoted that the oligarchs have the best lawyers in London, and they don't. They have in-house government lawyers.
And so, I mean, we're sending hundreds of millions, if not billions of pounds of military equipment to Ukraine to fight the Russians. Why don't we spend 20 million pounds and the government hires in QCs from the same firms that would be representing the Russian oligarchs and start doing some of these prosecutions properly?
How much have you told your story face-to-face with British politicians?
I tell my story face-to-face on a daily basis, and the politicians are all on my side. So here's what happens. I go to Parliament, and I've got friends in all different parties. I've been talking to them for years. We all know each other. They say, this is outrageous, like your response is right now, and they're banging the table. And they say to the government, this is outrageous, we need to do something. And the government says, you're right, this is outrageous. The government starts banging the table. But what happens is law enforcement, the government can't, so a politician can't force an investigation. A government can't enforce an investigation. These investigation agencies, the national crime agencies, got to be supposed to be independent. So, and they just don't do it. And they come up with whatever bureaucratic reasons are that they can't do it.
But have you ever had a face-to-face meeting with the Home Secretary or the Foreign Secretary or the Prime Minister?
On this issue, no.
See, I found that incredible. I mean, if I was in one of those positions and I knew of your story, if I'd read your book, I would immediately want to call you and say, okay, what do you think we should do?
Well, I think they probably should fire the person in charge of the National Crime Agency and put together a budget for the best possible person they can find in the world from whatever country they need to bring that person in from, and then do a total reform of the whole system, because it just doesn't work.
And do you think the reason that they don't do that is because they have civil servants whispering in their ear, Minister, if you do that, this could happen?
Yeah. You have this the civil service is like, stymieing up everything that ever happens, the risk aversion to the highest level, so nobody wants to do anything.
Do you ever see that changing?
You
could have a Prime Minister within 2 years who used to be Director of Public Prosecutions. And you think, well, if he can't do anything, then probably no one can.
I've been around here. I've lived here for 32 years. I've seen so many horrific scandals and heartbreaking situations where everybody says everything needs to change, and then it just doesn't. Until I'm proved otherwise, I think everyone's going to bang the table again, and this problem will fester.
Lots of people saying, what's his book called? I think I have mentioned it at least 5 times so far. It's called Freezing Order. And the publication date was a couple of weeks ago, wasn't it?
A couple of weeks ago. So, it's in America, it's number 1 on the New York Times bestseller list. Here, it's number 2 on the Sunday Times bestseller list.
That's not bad, is it?
I wanted to be number 1, but what can I say?
I dread to think who's beating you. Listen, this is quite a to the point text. Vince says, this bloke is extremely brave and just begging to get Novichoked. I mean, that must be something, we did talk about this last time we were on, but that must be something, your own personal security, your own personal safety, your family must worry on a day-to-day basis about that, even if you've sort of almost become a little bit immune to it.
We all have to take precautions. I have to take precautions. But, in terms of my own personal risk, yeah, I'm at risk. Of course, they hate my guts. They want to kill me. They've tried all sorts of things. But when I watch what's going on, when I watch television, I watch what's going on in Ukraine, and I watch the bombs falling on people, and I watch the bravery of the Ukrainian soldiers, I'm thinking, whatever risk I'm taking, and I'm going, it's nothing compared to what's going on right now. Nobody should be thinking about me. We should be thinking about the Ukrainians, because it's just so in civilians in Mariupol who are just being bombarded on a daily basis. It's just hard for me to even think about whatever risks I have. It's nothing compared to those people.
Well, we have so much more to talk about. We're going to take your calls as well in the next half an hour. 0345 6060 973. Colin wants to know, is the book available as an audiobook? I'm imagining the answer is yes.
Absolutely yes. I unfortunately didn't narrate it. I didn't have time.
Oh, you should have done.
And maybe I will. I mean, we might do version 2 where it was my voice, but they asked me to spend 3 weeks in the studio in the midst of this whole Ukraine crisis. I just didn't have time.
Right, more from Bill Browder in just a moment. His book is called Freezing Order. It's 8:30 on LBC. Let's get the news headlines with Amelia Cox.
The Foreign Office says it's supporting the families of a British man killed in Ukraine and another who's missing. Meanwhile, President Biden is asking the US Congress for another $33 billion to help Ukraine defend itself against the Russian invasion. Police are focusing their search for a mother who disappeared from Burnley last week on the Forest of Bowland. A 50-year-old man has been charged with the murder of 33-year-old Katie Kenyon. And a report's recommended a Labour MP be suspended from the House of Commons for 2 days for bullying. Liam Burns stopped talking to a member of his constituency staff and disabled his parliamentary email account for a time. LBC weather, mostly dry tonight, low cloud lingering in parts of eastern Britain, a low of freezing.
LBC.
Selling your car doesn't
with Iain Dale. Call 0345 6060 973.
8:34. I was just saying to Bill during the news there that the texts are coming in about one every 10 seconds, all saying, I'm buying the book right now. So I'm hoping we can get him to number one. Ali says, this is amazing, buying his book now. Ordered Bill's book, love this guy, has balls, inspiring. Another Ali in Winchester. So hopefully we can get it to number one. Now we're going to go to your calls now. 0345 6060 973 if you have a question you want to put to Bill Browder. John is in Doncaster. Hello, John.
Hello, Iain and Mr. Browder. May I ask, have the oligarchs and Mr. Putin's believers reached the pinnacle of their upturned pyramid, and are they now falling down and burning?
Yeah, it's not a good time to be a Russian oligarch on any front. So there are 118 of these guys, 118 billionaires. And at the moment, 35 of them have been sanctioned by either the EU, US, UK, or Canada. And when you get sanctioned, it really messes your life up. So even if these guys have hidden their property in like shell companies and British Virgin Islands and Cayman and all this kind of stuff, no bank, no matter what, wants to move money for them anywhere. And so they're basically out of luck in the business world. And even if you're not sanctioned, if you're one of the other guys not on the sanctions list, nobody wants to touch you either because they don't want to like find out that you're going to be sanctioned. And so these guys, they used to come to London and everybody was just being so nice to them, rolling out the red carpet and like, how can we help you, Mr. So-and-so? And now all of a sudden these guys are radioactive. It's not a fun time to be a Russian oligarch.
Why have only 35 out of 118 been sanctioned? My immediate reaction when you said that was, well, what about the others?
That's my immediate reaction as well.
I feel better now.
I came on your show 2 months ago and was banging the table with saying, let's sanction the oligarchs. We hadn't sanctioned a single one back then. And I mean, I have to say, I'm normally the most critical guy when it comes to government policy. But I think our government here has done a pretty good job so far. I mean, we've sent weapons. We were first sent to send weapons. We're sanctioning a whole bunch of oligarchs, some of the really big ones. Yes, there's a lot more oligarchs to sanction, but I'm not dissatisfied with the government's policy.
But people do question why there are some oligarchs on the American list or the EU list that we haven't gone after. I mean, I'm sure maybe it works the other way around as well, but it does seem a little bit odd that there hasn't been more coordination here.
It makes no sense. And I'll tell you something really strange. So Abramovich is on our list and on the EU list, but not on the US list. Like, why is that? And a bunch of other guys, for that matter, that we've sanctioned that they haven't sanctioned. And so it's I don't think that there's somebody cooking up things saying, well, we don't want to sanction a whole bunch of oligarchs in the US. I think it's just, time takes time to get these people on the list.
How powerful are these sanctions? When we read in the newspapers today that Abramovich is demanding an extra 500 million on the sale price of Chelsea Football Club, it's not going to go to him. It's apparently going to go to charities. But he's apparently saying that he's going to put a block on the sale. And you think, well, how can you put a block on the sale? You've just been sanctioned.
Well, I mean, the whole thing doesn't make any sense to me. So, I mean, first of all, how can he even carry on running it if it's his company and it's sanctioned? How does he pay his rent or his players or whatever he's paying? And the investment bankers who are organizing the auction, he can't pay them. How are they? What money are they doing this for? And
presumably they get it out of the sale price.
Yeah, but then they're doing business with a sanctioned individual. None of this stuff makes any sense to me. It's not very transparent.
Well, I think they're presumably working for some part of the government on this.
I don't think so. I don't think the government has hired this investment bank to work for them. It's I think it's all very
because he did announce the sale before he was sanctioned, didn't he?
Yeah, but that doesn't mean anything. I mean, it wasn't sold before he was sanctioned, and I mean, it'll be very interesting. Just today, the Canadians have passed a law to say that assets that have been frozen can now be repurposed and taken for victims. And so it'll be really nice if the assets eventually that are frozen go and pay for Ukrainians' reconstruction.
Well, it'll be interesting to see if our government follows suit on that. John, thank you. Let's go to David in Enfield. Hello, David.
Bill?
Hi.
Bill, I listened to a talk you gave last year, and you made a statement in that talk at the end. You made a comment that Brexit aligned with Putin's interests. Now, in your research for your books and the sort of large inflows of money into London, did you find any evidence that Putin or any of his associates or oligarchs were directly or indirectly involved in funding individuals or organizations in Vote Leave? And secondly, I note since 2006, since Litvinenko was poisoned in London, successive governments issued over 2,500 golden visas to these rich Russians who came into the UK, settled here, brought their money here, infiltrated high society. We've had Lord Lebedev now of Siberia. We had Lord Barker, who was running EM Plus in Russia. Do you think this was a deliberate strategy to influence British government at the highest levels? They were giving donations to political parties. Do you think it was an overall plan to get through Brexit? Because that would be to Putin's advantage to break up the Western alliance.
So Putin hates any group that's bigger than him. He likes little countries that he can bully, and he hates big countries. He hates the United States. He hates NATO because it's a collection of countries, and he hates the European Union because it's a large group of countries. And so, in his perfect world, NATO would be dissolved, and he's been making lots of statements about NATO because he doesn't like he doesn't like Estonia being able to stand up to him. And in a perfect world, the European Union would dissolve because he could then pick off Hungary and this country and that country and do all the nasty stuff that he's doing. And so it was in his interest to have Britain leave the European Union, and it would be in his interest to have all sorts of other countries leave the European Union. And I think he actually lent. We know for sure that he lent money to Marine Le Pen, who is also an anti-European. I'm not an expert on what happened with Brexit, and so I don't want to make grandiose statements that I can't back up. But it would certainly be in his interest not to have one less country in the European Union.
But there have been all sorts of allegations about Russian funding for Vote Leave, Leave.eu. Well, actually more Leave.eu than Vote Leave. Is it your suspicion that some of those allegations are true, that Russian money did find its way into the Brexit campaign?
Well, I've heard the same allegations, and what should have happened here is we should have had in America they had a Mueller, Robert Mueller, the special prosecutor, set up a major investigation to look into it. Why in the world did we not, given the gravity of these allegations and the consequence of these allegations, why wasn't there an investigation here?
Presumably because there was suspicion rather than evidence. And Carol Cadwallader, the Observer journalist, she's made all sorts of allegations and has ended up in court over one or two of them. But she hasn't been able to find the smoking gun.
But it's not her job to find the smoking gun. If there are credible suspicions, then an investigation should be conducted. It's not a journalist's job to prove a case. It's a journalist's job to unearth stuff, and if the stuff is credible, then it's the job of law enforcement to then investigate properly. And I don't want to get into a pro-Brexit. That's all water under the bridge. But if there was really involvement of Russians, and let's put aside the highly contentious issue of Brexit, I can tell you, and the caller just made the point, and I totally agree with him, which is that there's a hell of a lot of Russian money sloshing around here buying influence. And I've seen that with my own eyes. And when I say buying influence, I mean Russian money going to members of the House of Lords in both major political parties to buy influence specifically in relation to sanctions, to make sure that the sanctions don't bite, the sanctions don't work, the sanctions don't pass.
But if you look on social media at the moment, there are a lot of people tweeting things like sort of the Tory party is bought and paid for by Putin, sort of Boris Johnson himself is under Putin's influence. And that seems to be catching on a little bit on social media. Now, social media doesn't represent real life. We all know that. But a lot of people are going to be influenced by that sort of talk, aren't they? How much do you think that the Conservative Party, which is the governing party, I mean, Labour is, I would say, slightly irrelevant here, they're not in government. How much do you think the Tory party in the last few years has been influenced by Russian money?
Well, we know exactly how much. I think we can calculate it. I think there's. I mean,
no, but handing over money is one thing. Influencing government decisions is another.
Well, that's a tougher question to answer. I mean, based on Boris Johnson's conduct in this war, I would say that in this war he gets a 10 out of 10. He's done a stellar job of standing up for the national interest of this country and to stand up for Ukraine, being the first guy out there physically on the ground to be the one providing huge amounts of weapons when everyone else we couldn't even fly our weapons directly to Ukraine because the Germans wouldn't let our planes go over their airspace.
Yeah,
Boris Johnson has done a good job on this Russian stuff. Every politician has done a bad job on allowing all this dirty Russian money to come into this country.
Well, yesterday I was accused of being under Russian control, and I'm thinking I don't think there's another broadcaster who could have been more critical of the Russians in Ukraine than I have. So I'm wondering around what logic there is for that. But anyway, Bill Browder is here talking about his book Freezing Order. We're taking some more of your calls in just a moment. David, thank you very much for yours. It's 8:45.
LBC. Nick Ferrari at breakfast.
Police review over Starmer's lockdown drinks. Police chief to probe why officers let the Labour leader off. Can I just say, I have now reached exhaustion point with these parties. Do you honestly care if Sir Keir had a beer or Bojo had a glass of Prosecco? We are in a cost of living crisis, the like of which we haven't seen for years. We've got a crazed man running Russia who said he's ready to use nuclear weapons and he's already turned off the gas pipes. And we're worried about a politician having a beer.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast. Back tomorrow morning from 7. Listen on your radio and on Global Player. LBC. Britain's Conversation. Iain Dale. Tweet at LBC.
Stephen says, I'm sorry, Iain, but with all due respect, how can you say that social media is not real life? I point you towards 5 o'clock on General Election Day in 2019, where, having read Twitter all day, I was convinced that Jeremy Corbyn was heading for a landslide. That was Twitter for you. It's not real life. It's populated by people who are obsessed about different things, me being one of them. But you can't translate that into people's real views across the country, I don't think, anyway. Bill Browder is here talking about his book, Freezing Order. Chris is asking on Twitter, ask Bill about Putin's long-ago links with organised crime bosses around Russia.
Long-ago links are now, Putin is the organised crime boss of Russia. So it used to be, when I first got to Russia, when I moved there in 1996, it was what I called disorganized crime. It was like random crime. There were guys with like gold teeth and gold chains and leather jackets, and they were the crime bosses. And by the time I got kicked out of Russia in 2005, the disorganized crime became highly organized crime. It became highly organized under Vladimir Putin. And it was no longer leather jackets and gold chains. It was Brioni suits and guys sitting in government ministries who were, on one hand, thinking about OPEC oil prices, and then the next meeting thinking about how do they assassinate their business rival.
And I don't know whether it was you that said this, or I read somewhere over the last 2 days that quite a lot of oligarchs have been found dead in recent weeks, a disproportionate number. What do you put that down to?
Well, it's interesting because there were two different murder, what they called murder-suicides. So, and one in Spain and one in Moscow that involved two different individuals who were working in gas. One of them was at Gazprom Bank and another one was at Gazprom. And the Russians said, of course, this man went out of his mind, he killed his family, and then he killed himself. But whenever I see a story like that, and I have no knowledge about these two specific stories, but whenever I see a Russian oligarch or a wealthy Russian businessman dying in violent and suspicious circumstances, I always assume the worst first and eliminate that, as opposed to assuming that it's innocent before you take the worst assumption. And so I don't know these two specific examples, but I've seen enough examples where people die in Russia and they were murders.
Right, let's go to Simon in Greenwich. Hi, Simon.
Hello, Ian. It's a pleasure to speak to you. Great show. It's a really pleasure to speak to Bill, and I have a question for him. The question is, I think, Bill, you've been really quite over favourable to our government. Do you feel, my question is a very simple one, do you feel that their response to the Ukrainian war, and on the front foot, as you say, they're a fine example of that, but do you think it's a response to the fact they've been caught with their trousers down, and the fact that they've been implicit and in a way facilitated over the last 20 years the war in Ukraine with a loose, lax financial system? And they knew, I'm sure they knew about this. What are your feelings about that?
Well, so first of all, yes, if you knew me and knew what I've been saying for the last 20 years, I've never been positive or complimentary about government at all. I mean, I can verify that. I mean, they hate me in the government because all I do is come and ask them to do things that they're not doing, which are the right things to do in terms of cleaning up, sanctioning oligarchs. I've been literally banging at the door of this government for 12 years, asking them to do the right thing in relation to Russian oligarchs, and they haven't. And I've been highly critical. They've never even wanted to meet with me because they just think that the meeting would be a toxic meeting where they just get into trouble. And so believe me, I'm not some kind of government complimenter. But I think you're right that I think that Vladimir Putin has done so many dirty things over the last 20 years. He's this murder with polonium of Litvinenko. What did we do about that? Nothing. No, the Novichok. We had to shut down the city of Salisbury for a week because of this Novichok, a banned chemical nerve agent. And what did we do after that? Did we impose Article 5 of NATO, on a chemical weapons attack? No, we sent thousands of people to Russia for the World Cup. It's been a total disaster, our response over a long period of time, to Vladimir Putin's many atrocities. And everybody has just wanted to sweep it under the carpet, appease him, and let the petro-criminal dollars from Russia flow. And I think to a certain extent, the reason we're in this mess is because we've given Vladimir Putin so many passes that he thought he could get away with this and nothing would happen. And
was this in part political naivety where I think when he first came to power, I think understandably, George W. Bush, Tony Blair both tried to befriend him. I mean, it didn't work, and there have been various attempts since then to reset relations. I think when Boris Johnson first became Foreign Secretary, he tried to do that. Didn't work either. So do you think there has been political naivety here?
Well, definitely. I mean, so the two people you can't really blame are the people who saw Putin when he just came to power, because we didn't know what kind of person he was. So Blair and Bush didn't know what kind of person he was. But
didn't our intelligence services know what kind of person he was?
Maybe yes, maybe no. But okay, maybe we could even be critical of them. But everyone after that, all these people showed up, and it's not just here; it's everywhere. In the United States, just as bad or worse. They would show up, and there was a certain arrogance about anyone who ever came into power. You know, Barack Obama becomes president, and he says, "Well, Bush, he didn't know what he was doing. I'm such a special person. I know what I'm doing. I'm so great. I'm so good. Look, I was elected to the United States, president of the United States of America. I'm gonna talk this guy into being a good guy, and I'm gonna reset relations." He had something called the Russian reset. And of course, Putin was just laughing. He's saying, okay, for a good 2.5 years, I can get away with anything because he's got his reset. And then, of course, it didn't work out for Obama. And then Donald Trump comes in and says, he's not a killer. I know how to get along with him, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, doesn't work out for anybody. And same thing here. Everybody, as you say, Boris Johnson thought he could reset things. Nobody can reset things. This guy Vladimir Putin's a criminal.
Well, thank you, Simon. David in Victoria has got an interesting one here, which is one that whenever we talk about Russia, I get lots of texts asking this question. So, David, you can say it out loud.
Okay, it's very simple. Why can we not put a price on Putin's head?
To
hand him over, dead or alive.
Well, I think it's not really our place to do that. I think it's the Russian people's place to do it, to get rid of Vladimir Putin if they choose to. And by the way, if Vladimir Putin, the one way that we can get rid of Vladimir Putin is very simple. If the Ukrainians defeat him decisively militarily.
Do you think there really is a realistic chance of that happening?
Well, I mean, look. I mean, they're failing on all fronts. We just heard an announcement that Biden has authorized another $33 billion to go and support Ukraine. That's like half the entire military budget of Russia. I mean, it's a huge amount of money, and just think about this: if Vladimir Putin, if his army is decisively defeated in Ukraine, the Russian people won't tolerate him for very long. They hate losers. They hate weak people. And he'll have been proven to be weak. And so that has to be our strategy.
David?
That's a big if. And then my point is we can sort of cut the time frame down and stop spending all this money and just put it on Putin's head.
Well, but believe me, he's sitting in a bunker like 1,000 feet down. You see that long table he sits at? Why is he sitting at that long table? Because he thinks someone's going to spray some aerosol at him or some. He thinks that Macron.
This is an incentive for Russians to do something about him.
Yeah, well,
it's easier said than done, though. Isn't it?
I mean, of course. I mean, he believe me, he's the most paranoid guy in the world. He's gonna pick up any plot. He's going to foil it before it happens. Nobody's got the guts to do that. Look, Kim Jong-un is still in power. Same story there. These guys, they know how to stay alive. They know how to avoid these assassinations. Vladimir Putin's the most paranoid guy in the world.
Well, we're running out of time, but do you think that he's maintained the confidence of his inner circle, people around him, the military?
He doesn't need their confidence. He needs to create the fear in his inner circle so everybody is afraid of him. And he's successfully done that. You remember that they had that meeting with all of his national security people.
They were shaking.
And he had the guy, the guy who's head of his foreign intelligence. This is a guy who pulls people's eyeballs out with his bare fingers, and he was shaking like a little schoolboy.
Well, that's a good way to end, isn't it? Actually, I'm going to end with this text from Ingrid. Iain, please thank Bill for his books, both of them. What a man, brave, clever, inspiring, committed, and can write it as if it's brilliant fiction. Unfortunately, it isn't. Everyone should read his book and learn the truth about these thieves. Bill, you're so brave, you're making the difference. And that's all that I suppose anyone can ask, isn't it, for somebody to make a difference. And I think this book certainly does. It's called Freezing Order. It is a number 2 bestseller. We want to get it to a number 1 bestseller. Lots of you have been buying it throughout the programme. I see it in my text and tweet screen here. I really hope that this is read by as many people in this country and indeed across the world as possible. And somebody said, how do you spell Browder? Browder. Bill, thank you very much. It's been an absolute pleasure. If you missed any of this, you can catch it up on Global Player a little bit later. Thank you very much indeed.